A woman was found dead in her apartment under disturbing circumstances. At first, detectives thought the case would be straightforward, but what began as a routine homicide investigation would spiral into a 15-year mystery marked by twists, false leads, and unanswered questions, until a single stroke of chance finally exposed the truth. Pamela Chrysler was born on March 16, 1953, in Albany, Georgia. The daughter of a large family, she was known for her compassion and drive to help others. After high school, she earned a degree in medicine and devoted her career to counseling patients struggling with mental health and substance abuse. Eventually, she opened her own private practice, where she became a trusted figure in the lives of many clients. In 2002, at 49 years old, Pamela relocated to Athens, Georgia. She hoped to expand her work and continue building her practice. Never married and without children, much of her life revolved around supporting others, her patients, her friends, and her family. On August 21, 2002, residents of an Athens apartment complex reported a foul odor seeping from one of the buildings. Staff traced it to Unit 408. When no one answered, they used a spare key to enter. Inside, they found a woman's body on the living room floor and immediately called police. Responding officers noted the victim wore only underwear, which raised the possibility of sexual assault. Yet one detail stood out. Her body had been covered with a sheet, a gesture that often suggests remorse or familiarity between killer and victim. There was no forced entry at the front door, but the balcony door stood ajar, leading detectives to believe the intruder may have come that way. As the medical examiner began work, investigators scoured the apartment. Blood covered the living room, all of it traced to the victim. But on the kitchen counter, they discovered something different: a single drop of blood on a newspaper. DNA testing revealed it belonged to a man. The problem was, it matched no one in the national database. The autopsy revealed Pamela had been stabbed more than 20 times. Deep defensive wounds showed she had fought desperately for her life. Contrary to initial suspicions, there were no signs of sexual assault, forcing detectives to rethink their theories. Identifying the victim became the immediate priority. The building manager told police the apartment was leased by a man named Richard, who was believed to live there alone. Detectives quickly tracked him down by phone. Richard explained that he'd been on an extended work trip in Florida. He also identified the victim as 49-year-old Pamela Chrysler. According to him, they had met recently and gone on one date. Though nothing romantic developed, they remained friends. When he left town, Richard claimed he offered Pamela the use of his apartment so she wouldn't have to pay rent while she settled into Athens, and so he'd have peace of mind knowing someone was watching the place. He admitted they'd been speaking daily, until 4 days earlier, when Pamela suddenly stopped answering his calls. He said he assumed she was busy, but detectives immediately spotted troubling inconsistencies. Why, they wondered, would a man allow someone he barely knew to live in his apartment? And then came a detail that raised their suspicions even higher. Without being told, Richard casually mentioned that Pamela liked to sleep with the balcony door open. Investigators had not released that information, yet Richard seemed to know it. Exactly the point of entry they believed her killer had used. Are you ready to dive into some of the most terrifying cases in the world? Don't miss a single detail. Oh, and make sure to subscribe to my channel. Your support gives me the motivation to create even better content in the future. We're just a few subscribers away from reaching our first 500, so help me hit that milestone. Now let's get back to this chilling journey into the world of crime. Not long after speaking with police, Richard returned home. But on the way, he made a peculiar phone call to the apartment manager. He asked him to cut out the blood-stained section of carpet from his unit so he could send it to a lab himself for testing. The request was so unusual that the manager immediately reported it to detectives. When Richard arrived back in Athens, police brought him in for questioning. His behavior continued to raise eyebrows, and investigators weren't quick to dismiss him. The medical examiner had determined Pamela's body had been in the apartment for several days, which meant Richard could have killed her before leaving town. But as the interview went on, Richard produced documentation proving he'd been in Florida before Pamela's death. He also supplied the names of co-workers who could vouch for his whereabouts. Detectives followed up and confirmed his alibi. Forensic testing went further. His DNA did not match the drop of blood found on the newspaper in the apartment. Strange as his behavior seemed, Richard was ruled out. Investigators then turned their attention to Pamela's work. She counseled clients dealing with mental health issues and addiction, and detectives considered whether one of them might have turned violent. They examined her client list, but nothing pointed to a viable suspect. Robbery was the next theory. Pamela lived on the ground floor, and she often left her balcony door ajar. Perhaps a thief had taken advantage. To test that idea, police asked Richard to walk through the apartment and see if anything was missing. After a careful look, he reported that everything appeared to be in place, except for one odd detail. Her vacuum cleaner was gone. The absence of such a bulky, inexpensive item puzzled investigators. Why steal that and leave behind valuables? Still, it was a lead. Detectives began checking local pawn shops, and soon enough, they found the missing vacuum. But the discovery only deepened the mystery. The shop had no cameras, and the only clue was the employee's recollection of a young man, maybe around 20, who had brought it in. Attempts to track him down went nowhere. Once again, the investigation hit a dead end. A few days after Richard was cleared to return to his apartment, he began speaking with neighbors. Curious about the missing vacuum, he asked if anyone had noticed someone taking it from his place around the time of Pamela's death. Police had already considered the possibility that the vacuum might have been stolen earlier and gone unnoticed. But then one neighbor shared something unsettling. She explained that on the night of the murder, unable to sleep, she had heard noises in the hallway. Looking through her peephole, she saw a young man she didn't recognize rolling a vacuum cleaner out of Richard's apartment. At first, she thought about opening the door to offer help, but something felt wrong. She hesitated. As she watched, she cracked open a soda can she had been holding. The sharp sound made the man freeze. He turned and stared directly at her door for several seconds, before grabbing the vacuum, shutting the door behind him, and vanishing down the hall. Detectives were frustrated that she had waited weeks to share this information, but she insisted it hadn't seemed important at the time. Now that she had spoken up, police worked with her to create a composite sketch. When they showed it to the pawn shop employee, he confirmed the man in the sketch looked like the person who had sold the vacuum. Detectives released the sketch to the media, hoping someone would recognize him. But no useful tips came in. With no other evidence and no way to identify the man, the case eventually went cold. Over the years, it was reopened multiple times, but every new lead ended in another dead end. For 15 years, Pamela's murder remained unsolved. Then, unexpectedly, the investigation broke wide open. Detectives were notified that a new DNA profile had been added to the FBI's database. It matched the drop of blood found at the crime scene. The profile belonged to a 30-year-old man named Abdus Lar Rowe. His name had never once appeared in the case files, though he had crossed paths with law enforcement before. When Law Rowe was a child, his parents were members of a religious sect led by Dwight York, who built an extravagant compound in rural Georgia. York later became infamous when multiple children came forward with allegations of abuse, leading to federal charges that included racketeering, conspiracy, and tax fraud. York was eventually sentenced to 135 years in prison. Years later, when Abdus Law Rowe was 24, he admitted that his childhood testimony in the Dwight York case had been fabricated. But because he was only a minor at the time, no charges were brought against him. What truly surprised detectives was how his DNA ended up in the system at all. Years after Pamela's death, Law Rowe was arrested for selling bootleg DVDs and given probation. Not long after, he was pulled over by an officer who found a small bag of illegal substances in his possession. Because he was still on probation, this time he was booked, and a DNA sample was collected. When it was entered into the database, the system flagged it as a match to the blood found in Pamela Chrysler's apartment. Detectives immediately dug into his past and were stunned by what they uncovered. At the time of Pamela's murder, Law Rowe had been living in the very same apartment complex, just in a different building. He was 16 years old then, and investigators had never even spoken to him. Looking deeper, they located his old high school yearbook. The photo of him at 16 bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch based on the neighbor's description. Armed with this new lead, detectives brought Law Rowe in for questioning. They started casually, explaining they were following up with residents who hadn't been interviewed back in 2002. Asked if he had ever been inside Pamela's apartment, he said no. But when confronted with the DNA evidence, he quickly changed his story. First, he claimed Pamela had once paid him $40 to take out her trash. When detectives pointed out that this didn't explain why his blood was on her kitchen counter, he shifted again, saying he had discovered her body and panicked. Later, he altered the story once more, claiming he and Pamela had been romantically involved, despite her being more than 3 decades older than him. Detectives knew he was scrambling. They didn't need a confession, the DNA was enough. But they followed procedure, securing a warrant to collect a fresh sample for confirmation. While they waited for the results, the case took yet another turn. Law Rowe's own brother called the FBI tip line. He told agents that years earlier, Law Rowe had confessed to him that he killed Pamela. According to his brother, Law Rowe said he had broken into her apartment to steal, but when Pamela woke up and caught him, he panicked and attacked her. Now investigators had more than just DNA. They had a direct statement from a family member. When the lab confirmed the match, Law Rowe was arrested, and prosecutors prepared to take the case to trial. But despite the mounting evidence, prosecutors knew the case wasn't bulletproof. At the time of the murder, Law Rowe was just 16. The only physical evidence tying him to the scene was a single drop of blood. No fingerprints, no murder weapon, nothing else to place him there. A jury might decide that wasn't enough for a conviction, so prosecutors offered a deal. If Law Rowe pled guilty to manslaughter and theft of the vacuum, he would avoid a life sentence and the possibility of the death penalty. He accepted immediately. In court, he signed a confession and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He will be eligible for release in 2038 at age 52 and will remain under supervision for 2 decades after. Any violation, no matter how small, would send him straight back to prison. For Pamela's family, the news was both shocking and bittersweet. After 15 years of uncertainty, they finally had answers. The man who killed her had lived in the same complex all along, slipping past investigators for years. only to be caught because of something as trivial as selling pirated DVDs. Be sure to let us know what you think of the story in the comments below. And if you like this video, smash the like button and don't forget to subscribe. A playlist is going to pop up right now with more videos you'll love. See you guys next time.